Welcome to another edition of the Business Builders podcast. It's the podcast that's dedicated to the construction and trade industry, where we interview real life entrepreneurs from the construction and trade backgrounds. Today we have Jamie Mills, who is the managing director of Signature Build, a company that specializes in heritage and high-end residential work. Welcome, Jamie. Where did it all start?
Yeah, crikey. Thanks, Ray. Good to see you again. Yeah, it's a good question. Where did it all start? So my career in construction is not conventional. For someone that owns a construction business, these hands have never picked up a brick or hammered a nail.
Same as me, don't worry.
Yeah, my wife will attest to the instant reaction is, can you put a shelf up? And I'm on the phone calling a handyman. So it's not conventional. I started off in IT, believe it or not, many years ago, and it all came around the time of the Y2K bug. So people of a certain age will remember that. And they were offering a lot of money to people with very little experience to go and work on help desks and help banks and others not implode when the calendar went from 1999 to 2000. I think it was just a scam because none of it ever actually happened. So started off in IT. That sort of got me set up in IT. And from there, I started working up in town in the late 1990 to early 2000s. In a range of IT related roles. Those support roles ended up becoming project management roles, and those sort of IT project management roles ended up becoming infrastructure. So all of a sudden I'm there involved in building of offices, infrastructure that goes into those offices. And then I took a sort of bizarre left turn after disappearing off around the world traveling for a little while and dancing at full moon parties and sailing around the Barrier Reef and all that cool stuff people of that age can do. I sort of came back to the UK, carried on. I was working up in town, and an opportunity came to go and work out in the Middle East. Not as is the trend nowadays to go and hang out in Dubai and try and not pay any tax. I ended up living and working in Iraq in Basra.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I was working for the Ministry of Defence out there, and I was part of one of their delivery teams there. So we were helping support the British military in a live active theatre. So if anyone ever tells me that they're working under pressure, I often ask them what they feel it would be like to be, working in an environment where there's rockets flying over your head and phalanx guns going off left, right, and centre. So it certainly taught me a lot. I look back at it now and it feels like that was all like a bit of a movie, like it didn't really happen. We were sort of bouncing around between bases on helicopters and driving around in tanks and other such things. It very much like a boy's own dream. For a period of time, that was my reality. But these big infrastructure projects with huge amounts of resources, I kind of cut my teeth in sort of larger scale projects doing that. And what won't surprise you is that when I got back from that period, which was a few years out there, going back to a desk job it didn't
it's
quite
be hard to live up to now.
It didn't quite work out for me. I was just sitting in a corner office in some soulless building in Victoria, which is where I got put. So I carried on working for the Ministry of Defence when I got back, but it was very much an admin-based PM role. And I think that's probably where my entrepreneurial side sort of made its way to the fore. And I had an entrepreneurial seizure and decided that I should set something up on my own. So with some help from my brother and another friend of mine that I'd known for many years.
This was obviously into keeping that same kind of industry background.
Yeah, so essentially that was my first foray into construction. So having not been a trade, but having a good idea of how to run a project successfully, I thought the two made sense. So a couple of very experienced tradesmen and someone that's been running large projects and understands a bit more maybe about relationships between clients and suppliers, and understanding a bit more about the mechanics of project management, as opposed to just turning up on site and wondering where the that box of screws is. So that was my first foray into construction.
At that side, in terms of the construction, the type of construction, was that offices, was that refurb? Because
So-
obviously you've moved to where you are now. I just wondered.
So the very first job we ever won was for someone I was working with, in the Ministry of Defence, and I remember it very well. It was a £14,000 kitchen refurb. So I did a bit of moonlighting. So for a period of time, I was still working whilst running, getting things started. And that was our very first job. So there was two. So like I say, my brother and another guy that we were working with, they were out on site doing the work, and I was trying to win some work, build a website, learn about branding. And I guess that's really where my sort of passion for continual learning came from as well. I did okay. I did okay at school, and I think the okay is doing some heavy lifting there. I could have done a lot better. I did A levels. I did okay. I didn't go to university because I was attracted by the pound notes of the Y2K bug and the likes. I deferred entry a few times, and I never went. And what replaced that, and it's almost like it was a latent reaction, is that then when I started moving away from working for someone else, I just became really thirsty for knowledge. So I'm
Passion, for anybody listening, that is so critical. Just to take that first for learning and keep it going. Even if it's once a year, put yourself in a situation where you are learning, because too many people sit back on their laurels at a certain point.
Yeah, and it kind of reignited. So it's not like throughout that whole period I was out in the Middle East. I wasn't, I thought about Open University and doing an MBA, and I'd never really did it. And I think part of the problem was taking something that's quite abstract. So we're going to learn something theoretical here, and having the desire to learn that theoretical. That in a theoretical way, so without any practical application. But as soon as we set up the business, that it flipped a switch, because I was then able to take those, the book learning, if you will, and put it into practical application.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted more of that. So I devoured all the self-development books, all those classics that that everyone talks about, starting from how to win friends and influence people, all the way up to every Tony Robbins book, to Daniel Priestley, all these guys that I just find that so fascinating. And still to this day, it's changed. I mean, I've got a massive bookshelf, but that's because I like books. But I do more and more listening in the car, and podcasts and audiobooks and such. So
I'm exactly the same. I'm always listening to audiobooks, and I've, like you, have taken time to read every book and continue to try and learn, and improve.
And look, there is no way that my story is completely linear. But what I will say is that thirst for knowledge and trying to take what you learn and apply it to your reality, to the business you're in, has really, it's made such a difference. But not just for the business, but for me personally as well. And it's been great. Like in sort of later life, I say later life, so I started, I would have been about just 30, 31, 32 when I stepped away into construction. And sort of from that point onward, it's been a real passion of mine, to continue to be learning, and to try and do the same for those in the team as well, to always promote self-development, promote development within the team structure, looking at new ideas. I mean, and that a massive, having that thirst and having that desire to continually learn is super important, of course. But nowadays, when things are changing so quickly, I mean, the advent of AI and how that's impacting business and our lives generally, that's, I'm maybe to the point where I'm overwhelming myself with, how does this look next year, and what can we do? How can I educate myself? How can I not be left behind?
Yeah.
And I think there's an awful lot, there's an awful lot to be said for constantly questioning yourself and opening yourself up to new ideas, new approaches. And hopefully that's reflected in the how we operate as a business, how the members of the team operate, because if I can pass that on, I think that's a job well done.
Yeah. You mentioned the kitchen, that wonderful kitchen. From there, how did you move into? Did you go into, say, office fit out because it's more project management type work, or did you go into more refurb and?
So we've done very, very little sort of commercial work. We have done bits and bobs, but what ended up happening was we did this one job and that was great and very exciting. First invoice out the door, and felt like the first step on a very long journey, which it was. And then I started looking at ways of winning new business, and that's where I first stumbled upon BNI, which back then was great for us. But what happened really quickly is I realised I was actually quite good at winning the work, and we went from a £14,000 kitchen, and within sort of 3 months, £250,000 refurb in Fulham, and then very quickly a slightly larger project. And so I got a bit carried away with it all, and was definitely running before walking, and put ourselves under immense pressure. And the guys on the ground, I almost broke them, because I was like, wow, I think the economy was going pretty well at this stage. So early 2000s, lots of work. I would turn up, not your typical builder, and have something to differentiate myself from the competition with, and that proved quite successful at the time. So absolutely unable to limit myself and go, you know what, maybe we should take a beat here or take a step. Definitely didn't do that. Essentially piled on the work, and like I say, almost broke the team. And then when it came to delivery, we learned some pretty harsh lessons.
Yeah, but we've had some other guests actually that have done very similar, where they've the pound note signs have kind of drawn them in, and then they've realised they're actually in too deep.
Yeah.
Anybody listening, and what lessons have you learned from that initial journey where you are on that steep learning curve, and now obviously a little bit more controlled, a little bit older, a little bit more systems in place? But what advice would you give to anybody listening? Because you're saying very similar to what some of the others have, where they have been drawn in and basically scaled too quickly.
Yeah. There's a phrase that I've used for many years now, and it still rings true, and it's that you can't scale chaos. Right.
Yeah.
So when that was happening, I think as a few more of these projects started landing, I stepped away, and took the ultimate entrepreneurial plunge, if you will, and quit the safety of a full-time job and stepped into doing this full-time. And everything was new. Like, I had no experience really of dealing with accountants, dealing with any form of marketing, dealing with HR issues, recruitment, CIS, VAT returns, quoting, proposals, all of these things were all new. So I'm learning all the time. Like I say, I'm burning the midnight oil, and then some, trying to educate myself. I'm seeking advice from people that have done it, and mentors. And that's one thing I would say. Sort of something like BNI, which we don't go to. We don't attend these events anymore, just because of the type of work that it tends to offer. But when you early stage of business, it's quite a nice incubator. Like, you meet lots of people in a similar phase of their business, and you can pick up all of the supporting. All the supporting businesses that you need. Like, typically you'll find an accountant, you'll find someone that can do socials for you, you can find someone that can help with marketing, or so that was quite good. But essentially I was creating chaos, and I think I didn't really focus on systems and processes till a little bit later, because if I'm being completely honest, I didn't really think about it at that level. It was like the work was coming in. How do we deliver? Our commercial processes were non-existent. We were invoicing and not really understanding contracts. So, we'd invoice, and when they weren't paid like within a day or two, I was getting really confused. I'm like, well, surely when someone invoices, you just pay it, right? Yeah. Oh, no, they've got 21 days. I'm like, you've got 21 days? Oh, that can't be right. Then I started reading the contract that I'd signed. I was like, Christ, 21 days. But I need to pay the electrician. I need to pay the plumber after 7 days.
Yeah.
So I've got a 14-day cash flow hole that I need to try and figure out. And as a very small business, I didn't have it. So then, you start using goodwill and humour to try and bridge those gaps. And hopefully you learn a little bit of a lesson. And so you can repeat that process across all the different facets of the business, where I would blindly go into things with this, ill-gotten confidence, thinking I'll figure it out, which tends to be my mantra to most things. I'll figure it out. But absolutely along the way, dropping the ball and not really thinking about the broader business. And we've spoke before, right, about systems and processes. And there are some things that within a small construction business that get poo-pooed a lot, right? People are systems, processes, culture, words like that. They're like, oh, this is construction. It's just this is how it's always been. And like, that's how businesses that with that attitude, it will always stay the same. But we were never that business. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And I think, and it was that whole period, crikey, if I had a whiteboard where I could write all the lessons that I would learn over the next 3 years, it would be a big whiteboard.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in construction, obviously mental health is a big topic worldwide now. But in construction, based exactly on what you're saying, where these people are extremely good at their trades, but they're not introduced to the business principles, all the hassle and stress that it comes. I mean, it's 2023 figures that construction suicide rates are 3 times higher than the national average. Throughout your time, did you get to a point where you were down, it was just so overloaded and you thought, I can't cope with this no more?
Yeah, there's been a few times, and I think construction's quite, your business in itself, it undulates, right? So it's up and it's down. So there's just a slightly step aside, but I watched this video. I don't know, it's on some form of social media, and it was Tom Hanks talking about his experience in life, and he'd say, what sort of advice would you give people? And he says something. It's like, I wish more people would understand that this too shall pass. Yeah. Things aren't going well. You're down on your dumps. You're down in the dumps. Everything's against you. You feel like your world's caving in. This too shall pass. And then he says, you think you're the best in the world, you're on top of it, everything's going great, you're walking tall. It's like, this too shall pass. And I think that kind of advice would have been really helpful to me, sort of in the various phases of my business career where things have got on top and the pressure is coming from all angles. And I do, having been through a number of those cycles now, sometimes it's just taking a breath, right? And and sometimes it's not reacting to everything as soon as it happens, and sometimes it's waiting to see how things play out. Habits compounded good habits compounded will give you good results, right? So if you keep doing the right things, even if things do feel highly pressured and like they're against you, if you continue to do the right things repeatedly on a daily, things will work themselves out. The bad will pass. Yeah. And I think that's something I wish I'd considered, not to be too sometimes looking at things and catastrophizing and thinking this is it, there's no way this is going to work, because construction is a messy business.
Yeah, it is. It's very Yeah, it's got its own idiosyncrasies which people struggle with.
I try and explain it to people sometimes, like, right, so we've got a product and a service. So lots of businesses are product driven, so they produce something that gets delivered to you, whether that be a product that's manufactured or it be a coaching product, whatever it may be. But then equally, there's a service as well, like where you're trying to deliver something with at a certain standard, and make the journey of that delivery as good as appealing as possible. But equally, the workforce is typically all remote, like subcontracted. Obviously, companies will have some in-house trade and labour and management, but the industry is set up in a way that everyone is their own boss, so you have a subcontractor that decides where he wants to go on that particular day. And your client may not understand why the plumber isn't there on Wednesday because his job on Tuesday ran over. It's like, why are they not here? So, you're having to try and explain
that becomes your problem.
It does.
Exactly.
Absolutely. But also the perception that you're not doing a good job. Now, you could have done everything you possibly could to ensure that he was there, but he may have had something on the previous job that was not his fault, that meant he delayed, and he needs to finish that to get paid from that client, and therefore that impacts our job, and that impacts how we're perceived by that client or that architect. So it's an interesting industry in that setup. Equally, there are no barriers to entry in construction at that level.
Yeah.
Right. So someone who's never laid a brick can set up a construction company, as I did. But equally, I'm not the one laying bricks, so that's not the worst. That's not the worst setup in the world. But equally, managing your supply chain and finding trades that are a good fit for your business is so key. Like I was, when I first started, I would, you'd meet a subcontractor and you think they're going to be great for us. And you'd meet the guy, the salesman, he'd be brilliant. These guys are going to really... And then the guys that turn up are like all agency labour, then they're not bought into the business. They're just there because they've got a day rate. And, so you're having to fight with that. You've got other things. You've got... Your client is never really your client, So typically, all our works come from architects, interior designers.
So they contract administer, right? Okay.
Or cost consultants, right? So they bring us the work typically. So the lifetime value of those guys to us it can be really significant, right? So we want to build good relationships, but our end client is someone completely different. So we operate in a B2B world where we're trying to form partnerships with architects and interior designers and consultants. So hopefully they can keep coming back to us and saying, "Oh, we've got the next one for you, Jamie." But your end client is someone completely different. So you have a B2C element to your work as well. So you're juggling that. So then you're juggling supply chain and material challenges, and when the industry takes a hit, if you look at COVID, and you're bearing the brunt of these material increases. It's very difficult. You've signed a contract at a certain fixed price rate. There's no provision in the contract for a pandemic, so the materials go up 40%, but I can't go back to my client if I'm in contract and tell them that. So you manage that. You have to deal with that. Construction's full of characters as well. So the individuals you're meeting within the supply chain, they take management. And there's loads of contractors out there, loads of them. Yeah. Some are good, some are bad. Some market really well and aren't very good. Some don't market at all and are amazing. So I guess my point is it's not straightforward. If you were to draw the organizational setup of a construction business, from first inquiry on a website to handing over the keys, or dealing with retentions a year after you finish the project whilst they're holding that money on you. If you were to draw out all the moving parts of a business, it would scare a lot of people, and even people that are really well versed and set up and educated to deliver on this complex ecosystem of a business, of a sector. Even they struggle.
There's no introduction to it at all, is there? From the early days, as you say, you're kind of learning on the job, which is not it's probably the steepest learning curve, but there should be more. I've always felt that the industry, even from the apprentices or whatever, there should be some, whether it's a course or whatever. I know there's a lot of people now saying they're management gurus and they're running all these courses, and some of them are very good. Some of them never run a construction company in their lives, but there should be something out there that can help people ease them into that particular role.
Yeah.
In terms of projects, obviously we've got all these dynamics moving. Especially if we're kind of in the heritage and high end realm now that you the projects that you undertake. How do you deal with all that complexity? What systems have you brought that somebody listening may be thinking, actually, I'd like to dip my toes in the heritage, which is obviously from my own knowledge, but you can explain it is a different animal to, say, a traditional refurb. So
yeah,
what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so we kind of fell into it. In fairness, I think it was a number of years ago now. We were tendering for a project that was Grade 2 listed in prime central London, and didn't really fancy us for it. You know, we didn't have the experience, but you know, we got on well with the architect and the delivery the design team, but equally I didn't think it would be something that would be successful on. Anyway, we tendered it, you know, mainly to get in with the architect and say, you know, maybe we can get the next one. And as luck would have it, I think a contractor with heritage experience won the tender, which was to be expected. But then a few weeks later, there was a phone call saying, actually, they've just pulled out. So we'd like to introduce you. Do you think, you know, can you do it? You don't have this experience. So that was a quick learning curve.
Yeah.
So very quickly, what we ended up doing was bringing someone in with that experience, and she helped us immensely.
Because you were saying about the trades, getting good trades in heritage work is another level again. So,
and it's vitally important, you know, because there's always different in construction. The driver is progress and money, right? So progress on site means a bigger valuation, which means you get more money. Heritage, you know, and working on these these sort of listed building construction projects, it can't be like that, because quite often, you know, we've recently completed a 16th century farmhouse, and yeah, that was stop-start all the time. We've just uncovered these are original. You know, we were getting into the roof on this particular project, opened it up, and it was like this. Like the structural timber within that roof had been there hundreds and hundreds of years, and then all of a sudden it's, you know, the carpenters, the carpentry team are all there to start knocking 10 bells out of it, and it's like, no, you know, we've got to stop. So you also need subcontractors that have experience, but that understand that it's going to be like that. But for that to work commercially, their prices need to be higher, so that if and when that happens, and it's almost always when, because there's always that challenge of having to assess everything you see in front of you. This is predominant. Obviously, this is renovation work. So as you open things up, everything needs to be assessed. We need to understand, you know, what is the impact of what we're about to do. And having someone there that can sort of step you through that is really useful, and that's what we had. So we brought someone in just on a couple, you know, 1 day a week initially to help us with that. And then,
do you mind if I just stop you there? Because if somebody's listening to go into that, when you're building a tender submission for works of that nature, I'm assuming you put just a whole string of contingencies in, because you don't know. So if you could just explain what that is to somebody, because somebody listening may not be as experienced as us and won't actually understand how you would build that up.
So a lot of it's done in what we call the assumptions, right? So in a tender process, and if you're tendering competitively, you need to respond to the line items within that tender, right? So you otherwise, you know, if you try and add in everything that could be or what may come to pass, you'll be the most expensive of the pack and probably not get a look in. So so you do a lot of work in the assumptions. So it's about then highlighting, you know, we have assumed that the timber in the roof is sufficient and strong, you know, and in good structural condition. We have assumed, if it's not, then this will need to be assessed on site. We have assumed that the footings to the original extension are are deep enough and structurally have the structural integrity to take the new part of the building. So I think you do a lot of work there because you can't do anything else. Now, if you're negotiating a contract, so if you're just direct with an architect or with a client and negotiating it, it's your gig, you're on the job. You can you can spend time getting in, doing surveys. It costs money, but it will save time and it will save a lot of admin down the line. But in the market we're in, it's very difficult. Negotiating work is kind of the contractor's dream.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is the case. But if more people took that approach, they would get better outcomes.
Sure. Yeah, and I think obviously building that relationship, as you say, is the golden egg, is the negotiated work, but it is out there.
Yeah. Oh, it does happen, and look, you build it up over time. For us, we've been quite reliant on a couple of architects we've worked with over the years, but there's been a very deliberate push in certainly in the last 18 months to try and broaden that. I mean, these relationships are often one of the biggest assets to your business because you've built trust, you've got a track record. Clients will often borrow that trust from architects and pass it on to you. So if you've done lots of jobs for ABC architects, then you must be good. It's a bit like that social proof, right? So if they see you're working on the street on a house that looks similar to theirs, then they'll almost borrow that trust, and that's massively valuable. So that's a real asset to the business. But equally, only having a few lead generation sources, that can also be one of the business's biggest risks.
Yeah.
So that's why, like I say, there's been a conscious push for us to expand territory slightly, and cover a sort of a broader geography, but equally to try and find more of those delivery partners that are sort of mission led, that are sort of client focused, and understands that you can't have time, cost, and quality all at the same time, and that if you're buying a listed building, and if you're undertaking a huge renovation project, that's the challenges that exist need to be dealt with by the right type of contractor and the right type of delivery team. So we're just looking for more people like that, more companies and company owners that have that same ethos.
Yeah, because I'm a great believer that you actually pick your own clients. Too many people feel they're being done a favour, and that is the total wrong mindset. That's the root to a lot of problems.
Yeah, and I think often there is this view that what we do is easy. Right, you get almost at the end of every job, you're sort of walking around with the clients, and they're at decoration stage, and I could do this, and none of them, very few of them, turn up to site when you're waist deep in the muck trying to get some piles in, and running steel off your crane and in the pouring rain, that bit, knowing that often clients aren't around for that period, and at the end, as we're putting the last finishing touches, it does seem easy. But look, if we make it seem easy, that's good, right? We're doing the right thing. But I'm not sure that it's the most valued of professions, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, no, I agree. With regards to the project, let's many construction companies that I met and smaller trade subcontractors, they it's kind of it's an endemic throughout the UK construction, but they tend to have cash flow problems. They tend to have pricing issues. Could you just expand on how you control the price? Because where I've come from, my background, effectively everything was built around the job costing, and you expanded from there, and you made sure that was tight. How do you deal with that? And would you mind just expanding on it, so anybody listening, because too many people don't factor in all the associated costs, and it is complex.
Yeah.
And I just felt if you could touch upon that.
Yeah. So one of the first sort of gateway moments for us commercially was realizing that we needed to work on projects that were big enough to support the prelims.
Yeah, exactly.
To run the job. Now, for anyone not familiar, the prelims are the non-build elements of the project. So things like site management, hoarding, security, health and safety, site accommodation. So anything that doesn't go into the building but is needed to run the job. The problem you have, and I find it crazy that this is the norm, but quite often people don't want to pay it. Right? They can't that pound or £10 they're spending there. They can't point to somewhere in that property and go, well, that £10 paid for that, which is the wrong way of looking at it. Because site management, project management, commercial management of your job. This is mainly residential, by the way, or pretty much exclusively residential. But it's getting to a point where you can have prelims that allow you to run the job without it eating into profit is key. So that's when we first started. We'll have put on a 14 grand kitchen, maybe we've put 20% on it. But at that 20% was paying for me to be the PM, me to run everything, client liaison, me to everything in the back. And then actually, if you do the actual figures and you work out, reverse engineer the numbers, you'll have made no money on something like that. But you almost need to earn your right to get to the stage where a project is big enough to support prelims. Once you have that, you can then maybe recruit a project manager for a day a week because he's covered in the cost of doing the job.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, that 10, 15, 20% overhead and profit that you apply to the cost of the build or the renovation, maybe that can actually become profit. Maybe that can cover overheads and not cover the cost of doing the job. And it seems bizarre to me that in construction, that people don't want, there's a reluctance to pay for the people delivering the job if it's not a brick or if it's not a piece of timber. Yeah. So getting to that point was really key, because then that margin, that OHP that's left, you've got something there. Other things we've done to try and help over the years is become far stronger in our commercial terms. Stop being so subservient to what a contract administrator is telling you, or having open dialogue and say, look, what we try and do is run all of our projects commercially in a silo, right? So your project pays for your project.
Exactly, yeah. Don't let the cost run out.
So we're not borrowing from Ray's project to go and pay Peter's project. Your project pays for your project. And so for us, we always get an advance payment, depending on the value. It's normally around 5%. That gives you some cash flow to get started. So that covers mobilization. And then, that is paid back over the length of the project. So, in increments with each valuation, that advance payment gets paid back. And what we also do, we typically use JCT contracts. We add listed items into that, and we'll highlight what we call big ticket items. So often structural glazing, or if you're going to have a concrete curved staircase dropped in, or if you're going to, if we're going to be running the joinery, and these things have big upfront costs. Windows is another one, right? So what we'll say is, for all of these items, there will be a deposit required, and we will apply for that in the valuation ahead. Yeah. So we have that money in to pay ahead of it. Now, look, some architects, contract administrators, are reluctant to do that, and that's fine, but we won't work with them.
But it's also key that you have not only the confidence, but a lot of those issues potentially down the line are going to cause arguments galore. So you need to establish what the ground rules are going forward. I accept there are pros and cons for commercial and for resi, and you can't always do what you do in either. But it's critical that people do sit down and try to establish the ground rules, deposits, whatever it may be, going forward.
So we have it set out in our... so if we've worked with an architect, there's a few, as I've mentioned before, that we've worked with regularly. They know how we work, and they know it works. So it's quite an easy that you're pushing an open door there. But with new architects, there is a reluctance sometimes. And look, I get it. There's risk in paying in advance, but there are ways of mitigating that contractually, things like vesting certificates, or, doing things in the client's name. So should something happen to the contractor, they're covered. They will still own this item that the deposit has been paid for. and it's not for everyone. So, but equally, I've made the decision not to put my business at risk of, spending. And I've had it like early on, like we talk about when we mentioned before about some of these stressful times. Quite early on, I had a project that, it was a £200,000 timber window package, and the deposit was like 60 grand, and that was everything we had. And the level of stress and impact that had across my business was unreal. Like not taking money out of the business, and it was like a 10-week lead time. So you're not going to get any of that money. So you put that 60 down, and then you're not going to get any of that money until they're delivered and installed on site. And as a small business, that cash flow will kill you. That's
a great example, actually, because I think a lot of people, and I hope there are a lot of people listening that take this on board, because that is one of the most critical areas where a lot of companies, especially smaller contractors, do struggle. One, they don't have the confidence to talk about deposits and restructure the arrangements, but they overstretch themselves, or they put all their eggs into one basket, and then they're just hoping for the gods.
It just takes one thing, right? So, and then equally, that example, so that was 10 weeks, right? So that lead time from paying the deposit for these windows to be installed. They were these lovely Gothic arched windows, stunning pieces, but they take a long time to make. And that 10 weeks became 13. So for that additional 3 weeks, we're still carrying that £60,000, which was all of our float. And then, you have to make some really bad decisions when that happens. You're trying to run cash flow on a project, and at that stage the cash flow for that project was essentially dictating cash flow for the entire business. Doesn't feel fair, right? But I understand why people why there is a push from contract administrators, from architects, and from clients, because they're also concerned. But there has to be ways of restructuring it, and there are. And so we try and de-risk the project as best we can. We list out those items ahead of getting started on site. Here are the listed items. Here is the supplier. Here's their deposit requirements. Here's how we're going to approach it. So these will be either listed as in your name. Quite often we're happy to, once we've paid the deposit, sort of like we often say, the minute for these big ticket items, because timing's so critical. The minute you pay us, the minute that invoice from you lands, we will pay them straight away, and we'll provide evidence that to show that we've paid it. So you're comfortable that, I hope they've paid that, or maybe that hasn't happened. So put that to bed. And then once you do that a few times, you build up trust, and things become easier.
Do you take the same approach to your subcontractors with regards to holding retentions? And
so retentions,
I know in smaller contractors they don't always have. The subcontractors are too small sometimes to understand that, but it's, again, a necessary evil.
So I think you've answered the question. Different size contractors will have a different approach to retentions. So some will just say, no, not for us, and I get it. Some of our projects, retentions like 12 months. It's a long time. And this is money you've earned. You've spent money out on this. So sometimes we're waiting for the £100,000 for a year later. I mean, we could do a whole podcast about why I'm not sure retention is the way is the right way to manage this, but that's the nature.
Unfortunately, it's the nature of the industry that's gained this reputation, negative reputation in many cases, because, as you said right at the outset, I've got a van. I'm now a building company, and there's no certification or qualification or something that can actually give the client more trust, more substance to actually work with that person to start with.
I've often wondered why there's not some sort of license of some form, the way where a director or an owner of a construction business has to complete some form of training, or to have passed a certain type of test, just so they've got the basics in hand. I mean, just trying to yes, you need to recruit an accountant, but trying to understand how CIS and VAT reverse charge on a gross statutory company. Lots of these people, they were just really good carpenters.
Exactly.
And so there's a book, the E-Myth by Michael Gerber, and he talks he talks about someone that bakes cakes, and then all of a sudden they're being thrust into the world of leases and HR law and the likes, and not everyone's built for that. And the learning curve can be so steep that it breaks people before they get to that plateau where they can start being a business owner and not being that owner operator. So being the owner operator is really difficult. You've got hammers and nails in one hand. You've got, you're sending in quotes on another, you're invoicing on another, and that's really difficult. And I went through a period of that without the hammer and nails, and that was difficult enough. So yeah, it's a challenge the industry has, like you say, and trust is something that has to be earned. There's no assumed trust at the start of any relationship in construction, and so having a level of confidence about how you operate, like here are our terms, this is how we work, and doing that in the right way, presenting it in the right way, but I think most importantly, presenting it at the right time. If you start asking for deposits and it's never been mentioned, clients are like, why are they asking for? They didn't mention that before. If in your pre-start meeting you just say, look, really excited to be working with you, Mr. and Mrs. so-and-so, and here's what we've done. We've had an internal meeting here. We've highlighted the program, and here are the listed items that require deposits that we're going to want in advance. And here's how we work with that. So, you pay us, we then pay them, we then send you evidence. So your money that you've paid us to go on those windows has gone straight to the window manufacturer. What that does then, it means it's not killing our cash flow, which means we're not going to have to make decisions that are going to slow this project up. Do that at the right time with authority, and it also, I think it elevates you. It elevates how you're perceived. Do it at the wrong time, when just before the valuation, or when they turn up on site and say, look, we really need this much. I mean, that trust drops instantly. So right message, right time is really key. And we're not perfect by any stretch, but we've learned these lessons, and I just, from a stress level perspective, managing things in this way is so much easier.
Yeah, you're setting out to manage all the stress out of the process as best you can. There's always going to be some, as we know, but you manage that the best you can. Those negotiations and those conversations are external. How do you manage to maintain the culture? How do you manage to get the guys all pushing in the right direction? Do you have an approach to that, or thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think we're quite a close-knit team. There's some family members. There's people that have been working with me for 6-7 years. I've got one that's been there for 9 years. And so you get to learn about how, you get to learn how they are best managed. I think I often use the phrase, trying to understand that how you do everything is how you do anything, right? So you have to do everything to the same level, trying to communicate in a way with them that shows them respect, trying to communicate with the team that that engages them, so they understand that they're a vital cog in the machine. It is really important. I mean, look, again, we try and push through as much continual development for the team. So people that stay with us, we're trying to educate them as well as educate ourselves. So I think that's really important. It gives them value as well, so they're bringing more to the party each year. That's really important. But the key to all of it is recruiting the right people. And getting that right.
And taking time to do it. Too many people, because they haven't structured it, they rush into the process.
I've done it. I've seen someone's CV, got really excited, met them once, really excited. They're going to be great. Within a couple of months, he's sort of trying to do subcontract work behind my back, and you can read. I put very little. Not really. That's not fair. I put limited value in CVs. I put limited value in an interview, but you need them both in the process. Proof's in the pudding always, right? So how they communicate is really key for me. The level of respect they show others, I think that's a real telltale sign. So if I can see how someone communicates to their labourer, how someone communicates to a client, that tells me a lot. And so I want people that impress me, and I will also show them the same level of respect. So we talk a lot about whenever anyone turns up on site, we want everyone to acknowledge them. Whether it's the labourer or if it's a subcontractor, we're all here working as a team, so that's how it should be. And so we talk about things like that, and we kind of, we try and we communicate on our weekly team meetings. We'll sort of add a little bit of learning each time, and they're just some of the little standards that we have, like site opening checklists, site closing checklists, but they include things, not just make sure everything's been put in the bin, but have you have you offered to help today? Have you spoken to the client? Have you checked in? All these little things. And look, culture happens over time. It's not a poster, that you put up and now we have a culture. But it's all about the people. Look, I've been lucky enough to recruit a few key people into the business that have been the right people, and I've done the opposite side of that as well. But when those right people come in, it's like rocket fuel for your business. All of a sudden, everything becomes easier. So, hire slow, fire fast. Bring people in, take your time, give them probationary periods, really get to know them. And I think you'll find that, doing it that way is a lot less painful than the other.
Yeah, a lot of people we've had on as guests we've had here, there's been a lot of references to good people, bringing on good people, investing in people, training them up, bringing them into being part of the team. Actually, I remember when I had one of my building companies, my partner was a chartered surveyor. When we interviewed, say, a contracts manager, it's right person, right seat, as Jim Collins does. So I would effectively look and see if it's the right person, if he had the interpersonal skills, if he was respectful for people, and then Colin would go and meet them to see if they had the technical capabilities. Yeah. And so we staggered it over a period of time. But it's so important that, because you can have somebody who's great at the work but can cause so many problems, and you can have somebody who's great, gregarious, and gets on with everybody, but they're useless at the work. So you've got to get that balance. And you're quite right to take the time to bring somebody in. It can be disasters. Actually, let's just see. If I said to you, right, okay, Jamie, what's the biggest mistake you've made since you've been? If you can look back now and say, "I wish I'd never done that." Crikey,
that's a good question.
Be here now.
Yeah, no, never. Sort of. Taking a really relaxed approach to contracts, and there's sort of one specific, and being a bit naive. So we grew quickly, as I said at the beginning, and we had this one particular contract. And we'd done other jobs for this contract administrator, and they've been fine. But there was like 9 flats or something we were building, and it was an air development. So we'd basically taken off the roof when we built a few extra floors on top of this existing building. And so because of that, there was like an upgrade and adaptation to all the incoming utilities. And our plumber had said, right, this is what it's going to cost. I was like, brilliant. It was a big number, as you can imagine. So then I've turned around to the contract administrator and go, look, here's what it's going to cost. I've issued this change order. And they've gone, crikey, that's a big number. But yeah, crack on. I was like, brilliant. So I've turned, get on with it. And then we get to sort of the end of the project and we go, right, so there's this change we've valued, it's all done now. And then sort of, oh no, we don't agree with that number, it's too big. I'm like, oh no, but so-and-so said to crack on, said, no, it's too much. And I couldn't get my head around being told something verbally by someone and then them basically flying in the face of it. And just rejecting it. And, it was like a £40,000 issue that I had to stomach as a lesson learned. So I ended up having to pay the subcontractor the money they'd asked for, because we had signed it with them, but we hadn't signed it back up the chain. And I was just a bit too, well, we've got a good relationship. Oh, that's fine. They've said it. I was there in the room. So, I built that. I built the trust that I thought I had, and the relationship I thought I had didn't carry the weight I thought it did. But I had committed downstream to the subcontractor. So not taking contracts seriously enough early on, and just being a bit naive really. Contracts are there to protect you. Lots of people, certainly smaller companies in construction, seem to think they're out to get you.
Yeah, that's an important point actually. If you need to take it with the right mindset, and then it will work for both parties.
it
If you see that it's a competition, you've got another
But
problem.
it does, and you know, and now we operate in quite a cut and dry way contractually. Like we have, the good thing is it's not me dealing with it anymore, which is great. You know, but we abide by the contract, and just ask that everyone else does. You know, we all sign up to it. It's quite funny, isn't it? In construction, people sign a contract. The minute it's mentioned, it's almost people feel like you're being obstructive or you're being difficult. Because you're like, oh no, that's not what the contract says. Like,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, it's like, oh, you're pulling the contract. And I'm like,
Yeah.
hold on, we all signed this. This was the agreement. And so having an approach where you know, that behaviour is you take that professional approach to the contract from the very start.
Yeah.
Again, I mentioned it before about the deposits, right? So changing your approach midway through a project is a red flag. You know, so if all of a sudden you start becoming contractual, it's like, oh, why, what's prompted this? Why has this happened? Whereas if at the start you say, look, you know, ideally we don't need to mention it, but we will run this contract and project by the contract.
Yeah.
We expect you to do the same. You know, and that's the good thing about having someone that does that for me, is that I'm no longer the poacher and the gamekeeper, because that's tricky. You know, being the salesperson, being the front of house, the person that's potentially brought the project in, that's done the, you know, project viewings and gone through the due diligence with them. You then pass it over to the same person, just with a different hat on, that's now being contractual and technical with them. I always found that quite a challenge.
Yeah,
So also, it was quite, again, another milestone moment for the business was when we had someone else doing that, and you know, I think that felt like a marker of progress for us.
Yeah. You're doing heritage. You're doing high-end resi. What do you see for the future of the business? The industry, sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there were definitely gateway moments for a lot of the industry. The economy dictates so much of what we do, right? And I think there's some real challenges in the economy now.
Are you being asked to do more environmental sustainability, you know, renewal sort of buildings?
So almost all the projects talk about it. The challenge you've got in tough economic times is often those are the items that get value engineered out of a project quite quickly. You know, we want to go air source heat pump, we want all these PV arrays installed, we want you know, we want some sort of backup battery system set up, or and they're just not cheap, right? Especially if you're trying to retrofit anything like this into a heritage or listed building. And quite often these things, they do get VE'd out at the current moment. But you know, if we're brought in early enough, we can have conversations around how to make that affordable. But quite often, everything's designed by the time, if we receive a tender, it's all designed in. So it becomes challenging. You know, the industry as a whole, there's work out there. There's certainly opportunities, but it's a very saturated market for us at the moment. I went to a recent property lunch and they were talking about, I'm going to get the numbers slightly wrong, but you'll get the idea. I went to a property lunch down in Surrey, and one of the speakers there was saying currently there are 336 1 and 2 bedroom flats on the market in and around the Guildford area, because no one can afford to buy them, right? So that, you know, and what ends up happening there, and the knock-on effect of the industry, the sector we're in, is that the developers then stop building. So they're no longer building these 1 and 2 bed flats, which is a lot of what they do, because they can't be sold. And then what happens is all the contractors that were working for those developers, well, they come and step into our market. So where we were being asked to tender against 3, maybe 4, you know, we recently got asked to tender, and they were going to have 7 or maybe 8 contractors in it, which becomes it's a race to the bottom. So it's a saturated market at the moment. It just means it's more competitive. It means we need to be better. It means we need to, you know, sharpen our tools and try and be the best we can be, to try and continue to build relationships, continue to deliver these projects. The industry as a whole, the hope is that there's some form of stimulus from the government to help people get back on the property ladder, because as soon as that starts happening, developers will start building again, and then, you know, the ecosystem will come to life, hopefully. And you know, there's always lulls are always followed by highs. You just don't know the increments, you know, how long they last for. But you what we're trying to do is, we operate fairly lean. We're trying to use technology to enable us to do that.
Yeah.
And the advent of AI is also helping us in some areas to remain lean, but also offer a better service. So during these periods, where I don't know, there is stuff out there. It's not like it doesn't. It's just more competitive. So the hope and the aim for us is to really sharpen our offering, is to really sharpen our service, and continue to deliver for our clients at the level we have been. But then equally, as things pick up, as the market picks up, it should put us in a really good position to be able to capitalise on that.
Marvellous. Well, Jamie, looks like we've come to the end of this session. But if you can give, say, 2 pieces of key advice to anybody that's listening that may want to move into the sector, and also how people can find you through social media, or whatever.
Of course. Well, 2 pieces of advice. That sounds, I have to think, crikey. But
go for one if you would.
Yeah, no. I mean, there's loads. I think
I know we could go on forever. I'll try to.
It's more about just packaging up, isn't it? Look, I think one of the key things we spoke about today is people, right? And just be really, really cautious and focused in how you recruit people, because it can absolutely be it can be the winning punch. You get the right person on your team fighting for your business, for you. Like I mentioned, it's like rocket fuel, and I've got it right a couple of times, and it's changed the business. So yeah, it's a cliche, but yeah, hire slow, fire fast. That would definitely be a piece of advice. And just another piece would be going, if once you're in and operating, have some confidence when going into those negotiations in early contracts. You're not a bank. You shouldn't be funding other people's projects.
Sure.
So don't put yourself at unnecessary risk. Calculated risk, fine, but most reasonable contract administrators or those running the projects will understand the position that you don't want to be put in. By doing that, having those conversations early, and being consistent with the way you communicate, and asking these questions in a pre-start meeting, I was amazed at how easy it was to make that change and stop acting as a bank.
Yeah.
That removed a lot of the stress that I was having at the time. So that was a big win for us.
Marvelous.
And in terms of me, so we're Signature Build. Signature.build is the website. We're on Instagram and LinkedIn. We tend to work in prime central London, home counties, and we've got a small satellite office in the Cotswolds. And we're always looking to meet design, architectural, and sort of consultants that want to become delivery partners and deliver a project together, as opposed to us being like different spokes on a wheel. We really want to team up with the right people to help continue to deliver people's homes at the levels that they expect and we expect of ourselves.
Marvelous. On that note, thank you very much, Jamie. Thanks for your time today. And is that it? Yeah. That's a wrap.
Cool.
Is that all right?
Yeah.